Hey guys, how you going? Hope you're all doing very well. This afternoon I'm going to be doing another movie review. This movie is an action slash adventure slash fantasy slash horror film from Spain. It's also a French co-production, English language, released in the year 2017, directed by Xavier Gens, and this film is called Cold Skin. So Cold Skin is set in 1914. You've got this weather observer that is travelling to a remote lighthouse in order to survey the environment for 12 months. So when he gets there, he realises that his predecessor has gone missing and that the lighthouse keeper is not talking to anybody. He's a very miserable man. He hates humanity and he's taking out his frustrations on this new man. So the man, he tries to connect with this guy, but he's basically very secretive, and this weather observer realizes that he's hiding something. And so after a while he realizes that there is a terrifying secret surrounding this island that consists of these sea creatures that are coming out during night and laying siege upon the lighthouse. And so this weather observer is going to have to team up with this lighthouse keeper if they are to repel the attacks. But the more attacks that occur, the more this man realizes that there is a lot more to the situation than he first thought. And so things are about to become complicated and very dangerous, and whether or not this weather observer can pull through in the end is something you're going to have to find out for yourself, because that's as far as I'm going with my synopsis. Now my thoughts on Cold Skin. Xavier Gens is a very interesting director. In fact, he's a very good director, and he made a name for himself by making one of the Fab Four. Now, the Fab Four, for those of you who don't know French horror, between the years 2000 and 2010, the new wave French extreme really took the world by storm. It was the best place to be as far as horror is concerned, and there were four films that stood out in particular, and that is the Fab Four. You got Martyrs, directed by Pascal Leguer. You've got Inside, directed by Alexander Bastillo and Julien Marie. You've got High Tension, directed by Alexander Aja, and you had Frontiers, directed by Xavier Gens. And so these four directors of these four films really splashed out, and a lot of them actually went over to the United States because they caught the United States eye. And for that, it indicates how memorable these movies were. But unfortunately, as far as these French extreme horror films are concerned, when they've gone over to the United States, they've sold out, and they've lost what made them good in the first place. But Xavier Gens was actually one of those directors who actually kept his style. He made a film called The Divide that I thought was absolutely brilliant, and he maintained that level of darkness and humanity. And that was a very depressing film, and it really matched what Frontiers was. And so it's a guy that really hasn't sold out completely, unlike Alexander Aja. And so coming into Cold Skin, this is going back to Europe, and I thought, alright, well, this does seem very interesting. On the outside, it seemed like a Guillermo del Toro film, where it's got that fantasy element mixed in with the older sort of fashion world of 1914. And after watching the film, I will say that it is very reminiscent of Guillermo del Toro. If you are a fan of fantasy-like films, especially The Shape of Water, which I haven't actually seen yet, so I can't compare this movie to that movie overly, but a lot of people have. And so after seeing the trailer to Shape of Water, I can understand it actually has that similar feel, where it's set in the older days, but it has that fantasy-like atmosphere, and the fantasy-like atmosphere complemented by the two different worlds colliding together. And so in this movie, you've got the human world up against this sea creature world, and when they start to understand one another, the hostilities become very complicated, and these characters start second-guessing what they're doing and if what they're doing is right. And so first impressions never last, and in this movie, I thought that was the most interesting aspect, is that you do have the tragedy of war. Basically, these humans are repelling this attack one after another. A lot of these sea creatures are dying, but then when this weather observer understands what is really going on, he starts to second guess himself, and he starts to feel a little bit guilty. And so that's giving it a little bit of humanity. In a lot of these films, it's the good guy versus the bad guy, and the good guy is eliminating the bad guy with no guilt whatsoever. But when the guilt starts to hit this weather observer, I thought, okay, well, that is very interesting. It's actually giving a little bit of humanity in these characters, and that's actually elevating them past the point of a caricature. And so that's the best part of this Xavier Gens film, is that not only does it look beautiful, does it have a beautiful soundtrack, but it has complemented by a beautiful sort of underlying message that war is tragedy, and that it does have a very negative effect on human mentality. It's also a movie about isolation and loneliness, and that loneliness is emphasised through an absolutely fantastic performance from Ray Stevenson, who plays the lighthouse keeper. This is a guy that's very, very vicious. He's very angry at humanity, but you understand why he is. And so it's kind of giving you a reason as to why these characters are feeling the way they do. And that just, as I said, it gives it a little bit more than just black and white, you know, good guy versus bad guy. Then you've got the sea creatures, and when you understand what the sea creatures are all about, once again, that throws a spanner in the work. And so it's a movie that hits you with a little bit of emotion, and that emotion wasn't expected coming from a film film like this. I thought this was just going to be a fun sort of adventure film, but it's a little bit more, and that's something that I have to really praise Xavier Gens on. It's a beautiful looking film. You've got the very picturesque sort of images, and those images, when it comes to nighttime, I thought the overall action scenes were very well choreographed. I thought the sea creatures looked alright, and it's just a movie that reminded me of also Dances with Wolves, where Kevin Costner's character is starting to understand what these Indians are all about. And so it's basically understanding your enemy and the different sort of impressions you have of the people that you're fighting, and you realise that maybe they're not as bad as you think they are, and maybe you're the monster yourself. And so it's a movie that does have a very thought-provoking sort of response from the audience, and once again, that is another thing I liked about it. So it's not a terrible film. I thought it was actually a very good film, but there were problems to the movie. Now, unfortunately, apart from Ray Stevenson's performance as a lighthouse keeper, I thought the main character was a little bit bland. I didn't know too much about him. I didn't really like him that much. I didn't really like the lighthouse keeper, but the characters have a lot of mystery to them. So the characters are interesting without really relating to them. You can't really feel too much sympathy for what's going on. I felt a little bit of sympathy somewhat for the lighthouse keeper, and I could feel the guilt and the torment that these characters are going through, but it didn't hit me on the emotion that I think Xavier Gens really wanted, because there's not too much attention to these characters. Yes, there is, as I said, intrigue, but the intrigue is not fully capitalized upon, and I was left somewhat dissatisfied. It was, as I said, I was satisfied with the overall film, but I thought it could add a little bit more impact if that main character was just a little bit more interesting. He's a little bit bland, and I didn't think he really commanded that, and it didn't really command the response from the audience that was really needed. And I thought the overall story could have been a little bit more complex. As I said, it's the tragedy of war, but it is a very simplistic sort of approach that Xavier Gens goes with. And I thought the ending was okay to some degree. It wasn't anything that's going to blow you away, and unfortunately the whole film just has that lack of brilliance. Yes, it's a very good film, but the brilliance that I really wanted it to be, I thought it had the capability of doing that, but it just doesn't have the attention to details as far as everything is concerned. But there's a lot of it that actually makes this film definitely worth your time. If you are a fan of Guillermo del Toro films and you want something that is very European and actually very good to look at and some pretty good and frightening action sequences, this is definitely worth your time. I actually was reasonably happy with what I got, and as a result of that, I'm going to give Cold Skin 3.5 stars. Alright guys, that's it for my review. Hope you enjoyed it. Till next time, keep watching movies, and I'll see you later. Bye.